Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, August 11th. I still have to check, even though we are a little bit past our massive part of the COVID shutdown. So then everybody never had any idea what day it was. Today, I at least still have to check, though. So today I'm here with my partner, Jackie Durham. We were going to talk to you today about the basics of title insurance. Title insurance comes up in nearly every real estate transaction. And while everyone is very familiar with the fact that title insurance is part of the transaction, not everybody really understands what it is, why we're doing it, and how we can help you do this a little bit better. So wanted to kind of dive into the basics today. As always, our webinars are always recorded and distributed, so you'll be able to play this one back. There's going to be a little bit more technical information than we typically have, but just trying to bring you all the information that we can. So this will be recorded and distributed. You can catch it on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, or on the Koontz Associates or Koontz & Parkin websites. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So what is title insurance? The thing about title insurance is it's different than any other insurance you could even buy. So what it's really doing is protecting your financial interest in your property from any kind of issues that arise because of use or ownership. So sometimes we may see something where an easement's been executed and delivered but not recorded. So for our folks on the waterfront, you might find that the neighbor has the right to access the westerly 5 feet of your property to cross to get to the beach. If that's the case and it's not recorded, you wouldn't have known about that when you purchased it. But if there's a properly executed easement, it's still valid, even though we couldn't know about it because it wasn't in the public records. So sometimes there's that. Occasionally there's, a fraud or some improper recording in the public record. But more often what comes up is something is missing because of an error in transcribing or entering the information into the public record, particularly where we are in Sarasota County. We ride the line between Sarasota and Manatee. So frequently when we pull a title search and our seller is expecting us to find a mortgage and we don't find a mortgage, the first thing I do is check the neighboring county. If I'm in Sarasota, I check the Manatee records. If I'm in Manatee County, I check the Sarasota records, and invariably that's where I find the mortgage. So human beings do the job, so the title searches are not perfect, because the public record isn't perfect. So what the title insurance will do is if there is some imperfection that couldn't have been found at closing, it's going to cover the cost to defend that or to recover, to get it fixed or to compensate you for your impaired use of the property. Public record searches are done by humans, but more importantly, the public records are entered by humans. So you may see that you have purchased lot 51, and when the clerk at the court entered in the mortgage, they may have typed lot 15 or lot 55. And so a recording may end up lodged against the wrong property. We've had that come up in searches where we actually had one last year that our property was free and clear. The seller did not have a mortgage, but accidentally a mortgage from down the street was recorded against our property because they just got the lot number wrong. So it does happen. Those things are not problematic at all to get fixed, but some things like that where the mortgage is recorded on the wrong lot is not typically difficult to get fixed. But lots of the problems that are discovered later are very difficult and expensive to fix. And so that's what you're really buying the insurance against. So.
Yeah. Exactly. So I feel like it's also another example of why it's important to work with a good real estate attorney when you are collecting the title insurance, because there is a lot of, exercise that it's done on the front end by the title agent to make sure that the scope of risk is as limited as possible. If there is anything that's unknown that can't be found in public record or that is misindexed like that, it will be covered by the title policy. But it's really important to work with a good attorney just to make sure things like that are being addressed at the front end of things, so you don't have to lean so much on the title insurance down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is all about avoidance. With your medical insurance, with your car insurance, you're buying a policy today in case something happens in the future. Title insurance is you're buying a policy today to cover everything behind you. So what's happened in the past? Why is that? Because anything that happens today forward, your closing date forward, you would have to agree to. So your title insurance doesn't cover what happens in the future. And sometimes people are confused by that. And they're like, well, but we had two favorites, but it's brand new. It's brand new construction. There shouldn't be any problems. The problem with new construction is there's all those contractors and all those potential liens that were potentially filed and not extinguished properly, and notices of termination not filed. So there's a laundry list of issues. This is not a home warranty. This is a title insurance policy, which is covering the title. So that brand new property is squeaky clean, but it's ripe for issues with title. The flip side is true as well. People will say, this property is really old, so therefore I don't feel like I need title insurance because it's so old. I got news for you. All the property in Florida is the same age. No matter whether your house is 50 years old or 5 years old or 5 days old, all of the property rooted in the state of Florida is all the same age. So literally, they're all neutrally at risk. Everything is about the same. You do have, a different kind of risk with new construction because of all the contractor liens that could possibly cause an issue later if they're not properly extinguished at the time of closing. So there's a myriad of war stories that we'll pepper you with here as we go. So you can flip.
All right.
So we keep saying title insurance, but what even is the title? People think of the title as the warranty deed, as the physical paper that you're going to get. That is the legal right to use and own that property. So what we have to do is make sure when we first receive your contract, before we prepare for closing, the first thing I do is I order the title search. The title search shows me several things. It shows me who the current owner is, what the vesting is, meaning is it a husband and wife, is it a trust, is it an LLC? It tells me the legal description. It tells me what I need to clear title. So I can see if there's a mortgage that I need to extinguish. I can see who the owners are so that I know who properly to get to sign the deed so that I can clearly transfer right to the buyer without any issues. Sometimes there are rights that people don't realize that need to be extinguished. Maybe there was what's called a life estate. So maybe someone had a right to occupy the property even though they weren't the legal owner. That concept's called beneficial ownership. So they have a right to the property even though their name is not on the title. You may find that in homestead cases where there's a spouse. If it's your homestead property, even if you bought the property before you were married, so your spouse isn't listed, that spouse would have to sign to sell the property because of the homestead nature. All of those different types of interests, we want to make sure that we've got extinguished so they don't surface later after you've bought the property and say, hey, well, that was our homestead and I didn't sign off on that 5 years ago and now you've got a problem. That's the other thing with title is we don't always know at closing that there's a problem. So your title insurance is protecting you for something that is detected later on in the future. If the seller lied to me and said they were not married and they were married and now the spouse is having a homestead claim, there's no search, there's no public records evaluation that I could even do to determine that if that was the case. So
right. So the underwriters, the title insurance underwriters, and the title agents, attorney or non-attorney, are going to rely on these affidavits where you're stating there are no other heirs. I swear these are the only shareholders and nobody else needs to consent to this. So in order to make these transactions happen, you can't possibly factually verify every single thing. You have to rely on these affidavits and that people are being honest. And that's why the title insurance comes in, so handy, because people do lie. And some people are mistaken too. People make mistakes. So they might not even realize they're perjuring themselves on the title affidavit, and they may not know that there's other shareholders that need to consent, and they may be unaware of other heirs. So that's another reason why it's so important that it's not just sneaky mistakes. It's just mistakes, human mistakes in general, all across the board.
Darn people. So when we've got the title, we're looking at, who owns it, who's got a right to the property. That's where we're looking at what's in the public record. So I see deeds, easements, mortgages, etc. We're also looking at those things that what also affects the title are the things that are not recorded, which I can't see. Like I mentioned, the easement that's not recorded. That easement, if it was signed by the person giving it and delivered to the person receiving it, it's still valid under the law. You just couldn't possibly know about it if it wasn't recorded in the public record. And then lastly, we've got things like forgeries and unknown heirs. Those certainly are far, far less common. I've been doing this almost 15 years. I've never had a forgery, even though you see commercials for Title Lock and Title Shield, where there's these companies trying to make $50 a month to make sure that nobody steals your property out from under you. It's like, that doesn't happen often. Is it possible? Certainly. Anything, the criminals are smarter than the scholars, but that certainly is far the exception and not the rule. So those policies, I just had someone ask me at closing yesterday if those policies are valuable, and you'd have to have a notary and a witness who are complicit in the crime to transfer the title, because who else would notarize the deed to get it into the public record to take it out of your name? So it would have to be a pretty sophisticated group of people all in cahoots together to get that done.
Right.
So what does title insurance even cover? It protects you, the owner, if you buy an owner's policy, and lenders will not give you a loan without a lender's policy, against any problems in the title, against any liens that were not subordinate or that existed when you bought the property. It also helps because we've got a registry where all of the records are kept, and the title insurance companies, like we write on Old Republic, you'll hear of Fidelity or Attorney's Title. There are lots of title insurance companies out there. They keep a database, and so when I receive a contract, we pull the title search. There's a good chance that they've written title on that same property in the past. So there's already legwork done to have the root of title, which is what they call it, to say, okay, here's where we started from, what's happened since the last time we touched this property. I may never have closed it before, but there's thousands of Old Republic agents throughout the state of Florida and someone may have closed that property in the past. So it speeds things up. It's much easier to order that title search than for us to go perform an old school abstract at the clerk's office. Not that you can go there anymore. And it adds some security to those transactions because there's a built-in system around it. So what the title insurance will do is allow either the insurance company will go fix a problem, or they will pay you for any impaired use or ownership of the property that you experience. So you do have to be able to demonstrate that there is a loss, that there's a problem with the property. The title insurance doesn't kick in prospectively to say, oh, I'm going to have a problem in the future. You unfortunately can't make a claim until there is a problem. That's usually when people discover. Very seldom do they discover something before it becomes a problem, because if it was discoverable, it should have been discovered at the time of the closing. Typically these defects are things that you couldn't know until something else happened, which triggers you to even look at the coverage. So the problem with defects that we can't find are you never know when they're going to pop up, and you don't know how much they're going to cost to fix. So your title insurance premium is actually set by the state of Florida, and it's based on the purchase price and loan amount if you're taking a mortgage of the property. So you don't have to shop around, which is nice. You've got it's ubiquitous, if you will. It's the same across all providers. So you really can just shop on service, which is nice. But you pay one time, it doesn't renew, you never have to pay again. You pay one time, you're covered the lifetime that you own the property against any claims of use or ownership. So it's a relatively inexpensive coverage compared to how long that it lasts. It's not like your car insurance you're renewing and paying all the time, or your homeowner's insurance. It's a one-time fee, which is nice. And we've had lots of cases where people have had to make a claim. None, fortunately, knock on wood, in almost 15 years. None on any closings that I've performed. I've not had a claim, but lots of times there are just crazy things that come up. I had a case with a colleague of mine at an old law firm that I worked at, who bought a property and went to put in a pool. Later discovered there were utility lines buried there, and he couldn't put the pool in, and he was compensated for that based on the price of the home. So they can't move the water lines, they can't make it so that you can put a pool, but they can compensate you because of that impaired use. You're not able to have a pool when you thought you could. So.
Right.
Tons of
Right.
war stories, tons.
Well, and there's, the coverage is also, I feel like it's nice because with particular endorsements, it can really extend beyond even just your normal general vanilla title issues that people commonly think of. You know, I was talking to Joanne about, if you go and look at a lot of properties on Midnight Pass that are on the water, they inevitably have to utilize an access easement across another neighboring property in order to access their very, very valuable waterfront property. And you can imagine if there was a title claim that came up relating to the use of that easement, and you had a neighbor who their successor or heir came in and said, actually, as a matter of fact, I don't think you have the right to cross over this path, and this is why. If you have the right title insurance and the right coverage, you will be protected from that kind of loss, which could be a huge loss. Mm-hmm. Or if you, have part of your structure sitting in an easement that you didn't know was there, and you have to remove that structure, things like that can happen as well. They're not very common, but they can happen, and they do happen, which is why there's particular endorsements that you can't get to your policies, and I think they're inexpensive. So it really makes sense to just go ahead and get as many endorsements as you can, because it could really benefit you. You hope you don't have to use them, exactly. But they can be very valuable if you do.
But it's the same thing with your medical insurance and your car insurance. You don't want to have an accident, but you can't control it. And this is the same thing. You can't control it. It's unlikely. We don't see problems often, but when we do, the problem with title is you don't see a problem frequently. But when you see a problem, it almost always is a huge number to fix it. So it's not like speeding ticket, like, it'll be $100. No, nothing is $100. So that's another kind of issue there. So I had one, a longtime client actually ended up closing elsewhere for a variety of reasons. And they were at a non-lawyer title company, and the property was in foreclosure, but it was not, they were not buying from the bank. The foreclosure was not complete. So the seller was still that borrower. So they closed, I want to say it was like on a Wednesday, and everything was fine. They got the keys, and they were using this as a rental property. So, and they paid cash. They did get title insurance, and they were at the house that weekend, cleaning it up and painting, and my client was in the garage, and somebody walked up onto the property and was like trying to open the front door. And he was like, "Excuse me, what are you doing? Like, this is my house." And the gentleman was like, "Sorry, I'm from, BlackRock Financial. We bought this house in a foreclosure sale on Friday." And he was like, "No, I bought the house on Wednesday." And he was like, "No, here's my paperwork from the court." So what had happened was when they pulled the title search, the title agent saw that there was an open foreclosure case, what's called a lis pendens. That's how the world knows that there is a lawsuit that affects this property. And what that does is also shows that there's a foreclosure sale scheduled. So on our requirements page, where we have our playbook from the insurance company as to what we need to do to clear title, it said we need a cancellation of that foreclosure sale. That did not happen. So our client closed on Wednesday, but the court did not know that. So the court still held the foreclosure sale on Friday. The financial company bought the property in the foreclosure sale. And now my client called having a heart attack. Am I out my money? I'm out the several $100,000 I've paid for this property because I paid cash, and now so did this guy. I said, "Did you buy title insurance?" "Yes, I did." "Then don't worry, you're safe." So what happened was the title insurance company then went back to the judge and fought the court and said, "Hey, it wasn't fair. This Wells Fargo was the lender, had already been paid. They shouldn't get paid twice. So you should undo the sale at the foreclosure because they were already paid. That sale should have never happened." This was about a $240,000 property. So title was around $2,000, and that lawsuit alone was probably $15,000 just to get that accomplished, to get that unwound. So right there, he saved that much in one very unusual circumstance. And all the properties that he's bought that he's closed with me, he's still ahead from what he saved versus all the title policies that he's purchased. So, and when you think about the fact that you don't have to renew, it's unbelievable. We do have occasionally where people will say, I don't want to buy title insurance. If you're paying cash, you don't have to. You'd have to see a lawyer to do so, because the title companies that are non-lawyer are not permitted to do a closing where they're not issuing title insurance. And most lawyers are not keen to do it either. They're permitted to, but we don't do that anymore either. We used to, but we're compensated by the insurance company. So when you take that out, people think that's the whole savings, but then you've got to pay the lawyer to do the closing. So the cost usually offsets, and people typically elect to get the title insurance coverage. So,
right.
One thing I do want to say, you can keep flipping through. This is just a list of the types of things that are covered. Of course, you've got identity theft and fraud, and those things are even less common than the regular problems. What we really see more commonly are issues that are affiliated with the survey, so the boundary of the property. There's some kind of problem, like I said, with the guy who was putting in the pool, or or there's some other issue with the boundary with the neighbor, or your driveway's on my lot. Those are the kind of things that we do see come up commonly. Inaccurate, incomplete legal descriptions, those do happen. Errors, human errors where there's typing and numbers, that is a big bulk of what we see when something comes up. I had a case one time, I didn't do the closing. I seem to get all the problems to fix. Maybe it's because we do a good job on the front end, so we don't make the problems. But I had a friend of mine who was coming here from Ohio to visit. Her friend had purchased a vacation property in Anna Maria Island, and the realtors didn't notice, the buyer and the seller didn't notice. The seller owned more than one unit in this very small condominium complex. So when everybody wrote up the contract, they wrote it up for unit 4. My client actually thought she was buying unit 3. The seller intended to sell unit 3. She got keys to unit 3, but unfortunately all the paperwork was done on unit 4. Typically, you would see 2 ways that would be caught, because we don't get to see the property. So I would never have known that was wrong if I was the closing agent. I never get to visit the property. So typically, where 2 places you would find that out is when we run the title search, we would see that there was a different owner. Like, wait a minute, this isn't our seller. Why not? Oh, it's the wrong unit. The seller happened to own both units. So that tip-off didn't happen. The second place that we would see that we've got the wrong property is in the survey. But because this was a condominium, there's a survey of the entire condominium complex, not each individual unit. So that wasn't there to aid us either. So about a year later, it was discovered, because the lender was like, wait a minute, this is unit 3, you're actually in 4, you don't actually own unit 4, what's going on? So the mortgage was actually recorded on the wrong unit. And here's the thing about who's going to pay to fix this. This was a good old, plain old, honest mistake. Nobody realized when they signed the contract that it was for the wrong unit. Well, the state of Florida still wants documentary stamp taxes to record the new mortgage on the new unit number. The lender definitely wanted this done because their security lien is on the wrong property against a buyer that is not their borrower. So, I mean, it's crazy, but these things really are what happens. It's, if you read the title lock and all the advertisement, they talk about all the frauds, but 80% of the problems really are human error. And it happens in so many different types of circumstances, and nobody noticed at closing. And therefore you find out much later and when there's a problem. So the title insurance covered the cost to fix everything, covered the doc stamps and everything. So I can't say it enough. I just can keep you here all day with story after story about how all this goes sideways. But
well, like you said, when it comes up, you're really happy that you have that insurance. And given how small the one-time premium is, it really just makes sense to go ahead and grab that. And we have some of our British friends and clients, they don't typically utilize title insurance over in England. So a lot of times they're kind of questioning the need for this title insurance because they sort of handle it in the court system over there if a title issue like this arises. So I think we're able to kind of explain to them the benefits of this one-time fee that will cover not only your legal fees and solving the problem, but also any loss that you may face, so that you don't have to track down the seller and try to recoup what you can from the seller, which can be extremely difficult and impossible at times. So.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is people coming from out of state too, even if you're not coming from another country, just coming from out of state, things are different here. I know as soon as I receive a contract and I see that the buyer is from New York, that we need to talk about easements. It's very common to see easements on, utility easements of surrounding properties down here. And it's a big problem in New York. So they go, oh my gosh, I don't want a property with an easement. Well, you're probably not going to find one. And here's why it's not a big deal. So knowing the backstory of folks allows us to navigate them through the closing process in a way that relaxes them and addresses the issues or concerns that they might have and helps them identify if there's a better way. Should they be taking title in a trust or in an LLC, or should it be their individual name? Or what if you're having a partner in this property, what should we do? So there's a myriad of different ways that we can, help shepherd people through the process, some of which involves title insurance, some of which is just plain old, closing information that we can help. It's such a big transaction. I don't want to say, that they shouldn't be concerned, but there's a lot of times issues that people are more concerned about. And then once you allay their fears and say, okay, now here's how this is handled here, it's just different than what you've experienced at home. Or I had a closing this week where the buyer was very sensitive to permit issues because she had sold a property in California that had some permit issues. So we talked all about that, what that looks like, and we're able to address her concerns. So when it comes to title, the other misconception that I see is people say, well, I'm borrowing, I have a mortgage, so I'm sure the bank made sure everything is fine. Especially with construction loans, people feel like the bank is doing something to make sure that the construction of the property will be better. That's not true. So the lender will require a title insurance policy to protect their interest. It doesn't protect you. So these title insurance policies are just contracts. If you want to have protection for you, it is literally pennies more. It's not you're not buying separately a whole other policy in terms of full purchase price. Those policies piggyback on each other, which keeps the cost down. The other thing that will happen is sometimes people will say, oh, well, the owner's title insurance policy is this, I just won't get it. And they think that whole amount is going away. There is a credit, what's called a simultaneous issue credit. So if we're issuing a lender's policy and an owner's policy at the same time, the fee for the owner's policy, for the lender's policy is much less. So people will say, oh, well, then I'll just get rid of that owner's policy and I'll have the small charge for the lender policy. If the lender policy is not issued simultaneously with an owner's policy, then it is priced higher by the state. It's not the insurance company jacking you around. So those things look like savings on the front end, and they're just not. If you are the owner, it's protecting you against liens, against encumbrances, against encroachments, against errors in the survey, zoning violations, unpaid taxes, unpaid utility bills. Literally, if somebody turns up and says, Great Aunt Velma died and I inherited this property and I didn't get paid, you have the wrong seller. It's going to cover from the crazy to the common, and everything in between. But if you have a lender's policy only and you do not buy an owner's policy, the lender will get compensated and not you. It doesn't mean that problem won't occur. It means they'll be paid and you won't.
And I think it's particularly important when you say for buyers of REO properties.
Yes.
Because you're also facing, there's very specific requirements and procedures that have to be satisfied when it comes to a foreclosure. And if any of those are not met, now you have someone trying to unwind the sale completely. So the title insurance can also protect against something like that. And we're going to see some more of those foreclosures in the future. Those REO properties are going to start creeping back up, unfortunately, because of what's been taking place in this year. So that's something to keep in mind. Another reason why it's so important.
It's very true. That's very
And
true.
we just went through the lender's policy, so
Yep.
maybe I will click
Skip
through
that.
that.
So when we run that title search, we see the backstory of where this property has come from, how the seller has come into title. So we even see if there's a problem that should have been caught when the current seller purchased. So sometimes we get a title commitment that says, hey, you've got to go back 1 or 2 sellers before this guy and have something signed because it was missed. That is super unpopular when that happens, let me tell you. I always hate to be the bearer of that news because nobody wants to hear about that. And it's often difficult to find those people, and maybe they've moved away or maybe they've passed away. But you know, when they get mad at me, I'm like, well, I'm sorry, the last guy didn't find this, but now we have, so we've got to deal with it. But we search that, what's called chain of title. So we see how the property has moved through the parties over the years. We make sure that we've got the proper owner, that there aren't any deceased people that might have heirs that should be addressed or spouses that should have homestead claims, etc. We make sure that the real estate taxes have been paid and there's no problems outstanding with any other money, banks being owed, judgments, credit card debts, you name it. We search all of those things. They even search the person's name just to see, are there any other lawsuits? We often find divorces that way. If there's a divorce, we've got to comply with the divorce decree. If someone is owed money or money's to be escrowed to pay bills or whatever, we see all of that from our title search, which is basically a search of the clerk of court's records. That's really where we get the playbook. That's how we know what to do. A relatively newer search that's now required is the municipal lien search. When the short sales were really big back in 2008 and 9, what we found was a lot of unpaid utility bills from tenants that maybe weren't even, you know, the owner didn't even know that those bills were outstanding. And when I say utilities, I'm mostly talking water and sewer. The power, they'll just shut off, so they have a tendency to pay that. But the water bill may be unpaid, and we've seen them be upwards of $100, $300. Well, the title insurance companies got tired of paying those claims, because what would happen is somebody new would buy, and then they would say, hey, there's a $300 water bill. It's not mine. I shouldn't have to pay it. Make a claim on title, and they would pay it. So now, to avoid those claims, they require a municipal lien search ahead of time. That municipal lien search searches for unrecorded liens, like utility bills that are unpaid, code enforcement violations, things like that, open permits. Now, let me say on open permits before we get too crazy. I just told you this week, I had the lady who was very concerned about permits. There was some renovations done to a mother-in-law suite, and she was very concerned. I can only find, when we do a permit search, open or expired permits. I cannot see if something was done that was not permitted. So again, we don't get to go to the property. So if the MLS listing is bragging about how great this brand new renovated kitchen is, if you're concerned about that, you need to say, hey, they renovated the kitchen. Did they get permits? Because I can see a properly closed permit as well. And I can say, oh yeah, they did. Everything looks good. The work that you've described seems to be met by what's described here in this permit. You'd be surprised at things that do require permits, including fencing, pool cages, you know, screening in a lanai. Lots of things require a permit that you wouldn't expect. Oftentimes people don't get a permit because of time. There's a big backup at the city and the county to get the permits. There is a cost too, and some people are dodging the cost, but most of the time when I'm cleaning up a mess like this, the seller's saying the only reason we didn't get the permit was because we didn't want to wait. So just be mindful. If there's an open permit or an expired permit, we can certainly address that and get that closed. But if there's unpermitted work, our search will not notify us of that.
Right. And there may also be unpermitted work that your seller isn't even aware of. Mm-hmm. So I have bought a couple of older homes and done some of my own renovations. And it's funny when you start to look into, oh, we're removing this part of the kitchen, and you discover when you have your electrician in there some of the shoddy work that was done. And you discover a lot of additions or renovations that were maybe completed that you're not seeing record of that being filed as a permit in the applicable city. So I think that you're right, Joanne, that if if you notice that there's been a recent kitchen renovation, or if the pictures on Zillow don't necessarily match what's now in the home, you can bet that there's been some work done. And if you don't see permits, it's safe to assume that it was not properly permitted. So just something to consider. And your seller may not be lying on their contract. They may just be unaware of it because they bought it 2 years ago and now they're turning it. So you never know.
And some sellers have not occupied the property, maybe have never even been to the property, especially if they've bought a rental. So they definitely may not know.
Right.
Surveys. Oh boy. Let me tell you how many times my cash buyers don't want to buy a survey. You don't have to if you're paying cash, but holy smokes, surveys are, I think statistically, around 85% of the title claims originate out of surveys. And issues that a survey would identify. So you don't have to buy a survey if you're paying cash, but you get the exact same cost of your title insurance policy, and you've ripped the guts right out of the middle. Because if you don't have a survey, the title insurance policy will exclude all matters that could have been identified by a survey. So you're paying the same price and you're getting less coverage. Average survey is between $250 and $350. I'm talking about a lot block legal description in a subdivision, not acreage or rural property or something with thorny trees that's difficult to get to. But the average residential property runs between $250 and $350. So it's a small investment to really shore up the protection that you're going to get from your title insurance coverage. That survey is going to show us not only the boundary, line of the land that you're buying, it's going to show us the placement of the house on that lot to make sure that you're not violating any setbacks or easements, to make sure that there aren't, your pool cage isn't in an easement or something that's going to be expensive to move later. Frequently, we see things in the easement like fences, pool equipment, air conditioning, concrete pads. They're tiny, they're easy for, to work around if the county needs to maintain a power line or a sewer line or something like that. But if it's the building, it's a big deal. And there are certain times when, depending on the type of encroachment, you could be required to move the building, which is horrifyingly expensive. We had one case that I worked with Steve Jr., and there was a big property on Bird Key, and part of it had to be removed, and it was politically charged. It was extremely expensive. It was one of the biggest disasters I ever watched unfold in my life. And it's all because, that person paid cash and didn't get a survey and had no idea that they had a problem. Right. Another place that we see problems come up on the surveys are with work that's been done, like adding a pool. And the pool company didn't put the pool in where they said they would. So we'd get like a sketch that says, here's where the pool's going to go. And then where it actually goes is different. We had one where it was in a homeowners association setback. The pool was. The guy put the pool in himself. He was a contractor and had lived there for 20 years and had no idea that he had a problem. And that delayed closing until we could get the requisite number of members of the homeowners association to sign a variance, which took 3 months.
Right. And the thing is, there's certain people have a larger appetite for risk than others. So some people may say, I don't care if I end up having to remove something, it's really not that big a deal to me. I'm not that fussed about it. The problem is you're eventually going to need to sell this property, or your heirs are. So whenever you have an issue like this or a potential issue like this, it affects the marketability of the property, especially if you're dealing with buyers who are obtaining financing, because their lenders are also not going to like these kinds of encroachments or these issues that are presented by surveys. So it's good to make sure that you get the survey, you identify the encroachment of the pool or the structure into the setback or into the easement, so that you can get a variance or whatever you may need to not have that be an issue in the future, even if it doesn't bother you, so it won't hold up any sale in the future as well. Oh yeah, you never know what your future buyer is going to want. So right.
Can't say it enough. Title insurance rates are set by the state, so there's nobody's playing a game with you on what you're paying, which is nice. The endorsements, like Jackie said, that are available those fees are also set by the state. If you refinance, or if you buy from a seller who has had that title insurance policy 3 years or less, you are entitled to a reissue credit, We are required to give that. You are not required to go back to the same title agent to get that. People play fast and loose with that rule and try to act like you can only get that reissue credit if you come back. I tell people at the closing table, we'd love to have you back, but if you end up elsewhere, take your survey, take your policy, get your reissue credit. You want to make sure that you get that money.
Right.
That policy, the premium is based on the purchase price and loan amount. So there, like I said, there's no need to shop around. You just shop for service. Some things we have to be careful on are changes after. You've seen, I know, Jackie, you've dealt with this a lot, where people are making noise after they've closed about what they're going to do.
Right. So if you, if you transfer title via quitclaim deed after the closing, and after you receive your title insurance, to the extent that there's a change in beneficial ownership interest, it will void the policy. And in the instance where you have, say, a corporation or an LLC, if there's a change in ownership, depending on who the title insurance company is and what that policy looks like, that could also, to a certain extent, void your coverage unless you have certain endorsements that insure over that change of ownership interest. So it's really important to make sure you review your policy with your attorney before you make any changes in ownership, because you shouldn't assume that title coverage is going to automatically carry through and extend to the new assignee.
And it's also a good conversation to have before you close on that property to say, well, I plan on doing this later, because people don't even get that. Oftentimes I'm surprising them like, well, wait a minute, what are you going to be doing with this? I try to have those conversations and say, well, before you close, we need to talk about this, because it's going to cost more money or it's going to cause a problem with the policy. If we know ahead of time, we can certainly plan around it.
Exactly.
And the other thing that I see happening, and not to bang on our lender friends, but if you're buying a rental property or you're buying something that's maybe commercial and you intend to purchase in an LLC, the lenders are very fond of telling you, you have to borrow in your individual name and then do a transfer later and move the property to that LLC. They fail to tell you that you're going to pay the documentary stamp taxes to the state again. So even if you don't have a title insurance problem, you still have a cost problem. And the one I just had recently was over $1 million. So the doc stamps were $7,000 to move the property, and the lender said nothing about it. So this person was not happy to get to me when she called me to form the LLC. And I said, well, when are you closing? Oh, well, we're closing in 2 weeks. I was like, you're not closing in 2 weeks in an LLC. The lender will never have everything ready in time. She said, no, they told us to do it after. I was like, well, if you do it after, these are the fees you're looking at. They closed anyways and paid those fees because their seller wouldn't extend, but that was so unnecessary. If I could have gotten to them earlier, we could have saved them a ton of money, and they just didn't realize it. It's the same thing, between if husband and wife going to transfer to the LLC, it doesn't matter. It doesn't necessarily have to be third parties. Even though you're not paying yourself for the property, it's not a true sale. The state deems it to be a taxable transfer if there's a mortgage outstanding. If you want to transfer from yourself to the LLC and it's you and your spouse as owners of the LLC and you don't owe any money, then you can pay the minimum doc stamps and you won't have any disruption to your title insurance coverage generally. So if it's cash, maybe, but we've really got to be careful about that when there's a mortgage. And that's just something people don't necessarily understand or expect. So although it's not title insurance, it's a big cost, and we see it a ton.
Right, exactly. And like you said, coming and talking to an attorney early is, I think, key, because it can really save you from mistakes that you're unknowingly stepping into. So it's good to plan in that regard. And I also think, I just want to mention that I really believe that it's important to find a good attorney to assist you in a transaction, even if you're not selecting the title agent. I would still recommend using an attorney, because what I tend to see happen with non-lawyers, and not all title companies and lawyers are created equal. So that's why it's good to have a good attorney reviewing your paperwork. But I oftentimes see maybe there's a requirement on the title commitment, something that needs to be taken care of, and the title agent is running out of time and it's not taken care of. So they take that title requirement and move it to Schedule B of your policy, which is the exceptions to coverage. So if any issue arises from that, you're now no longer able to make a claim under your title policy to cover from whatever that particular circumstance is. So you can run into that where they don't necessarily warn you, hey, these are the legal implications of not satisfying this title requirement. They just move it to the exceptions. So you need to be really careful about things like that, because most attorneys will bring that to your attention, but not always. So.
And keep in mind that a non-lawyer title company doesn't represent you. Oftentimes they will say there's a lawyer on staff, but that lawyer represents the title company, not you. So if you have questions about how you should take title, should it be an LLC? Should I be using a trust? They're not going to speak to you about that. If you have questions about the survey, they're not going to answer those questions. They're there to clear title and pass the papers across the table, sign it. If you have questions, you need to call a lawyer. Now, and you're paying the same price, but it's like paying for a Maserati and driving a Kia. Like, nothing wrong with the Kia. It will get you where you need to go, but adjust the price accordingly. And that doesn't happen because the price is fixed. So oftentimes I think people don't necessarily understand that either, that when there's not a lawyer for you, there's no place to get your questions or potential issues resolved. If something does pop up, there is a setback violation. Who's going to fix it? Now you're going to go stop your transaction and go find a lawyer off the street to get involved to do something like a variance. I mean, that's just impractical when it could be done right away by the closing agent if you have a lawyer on staff. So just something else to keep in mind. But title insurance is a big quagmire. It's certainly not a nut we can crack all in one day, but we wanted to kind of bring you the basics so that you could understand. If you do have any other questions about this, you're welcome to email us. We're also welcome to field requests for topics that you're interested in. As always, like I said, our recordings are available on YouTube, our Facebook pages, and our website. I don't see any other questions. I think we've hit them all up. So thank you, Jackie, for imparting your experience with us, because it's always helpful to see. It's not just me in the trenches here seeing all the craziness.
Definitely not.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you next week.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.